there, the notion of risk is held almost entirely on one side, and the other side is almost entirely indemnified or protected against failure through legal structures and through cultural attitudes. So the use of resources, therefore, is different. People have to be careful about how they use someone else's property, and that person who provides those resources is entitled to charge money, or interest essentially, for the risk that he is taking in lending his property to someone else. Where you have these two concepts operating, you have a completely different attitude towards how resources are used and how profit, once it is made, is shared. And I can perceive this relationship functioning in a way that's more vital and perhaps familiar here in Malaysia than I can perceive them functioning certainly in Saudi Arabia, where these concepts are differently understood. So I haven't yet come to a point in my own thinking where I'm truly satisfied I understand these concepts. I think I need to spend a lot more time here in your world before I really understand their subtleties. But I can point to them as being enormously significant of the difference between Islamic social contexts and entrepreneurship and Western social contexts and entrepreneurship. Here are some others. Again, I would hesitate to try to pronounce these properly, and I just want to point out this sort of progression from one concept up through others toward a sense of achievement. Here also are my attempt at defining these concepts. That any sort of business venture here in an Islamic context will highly value these notions at the core of all activity. And I can assure you, and I'm sure those of you that have spent time in Europe or the States, especially in some sort of entrepreneurial venture, none of these concepts are at work in entrepreneurial activity in the West. There is really almost the opposite impulse going on. Rarely do you find people beginning any new venture by thinking about what they're allowed to do. Usually the attitude is, what has no one else tried to do? That sense of finding a niche or of arbitrage, of finding some space that no one else has occupied so that you can get there first, or take advantage of a flaw in the system or a loophole in the competitive dynamic. That's the impulse behind most entrepreneurship elsewhere. Similarly, this notion of thankfulness. Thankfulness is not a very Western concept. I think a sense of entitlement or of deserving is a more Western concept. Most entrepreneurs are trying to better themselves rather than to get to a point where they are thankful for what has accrued to them. So the notion of tawfiq and of appropriateness in understanding what you have gained in life is also absent. I think we can see, particularly over the past couple of years, the enormously tragic consequences of people ignoring these concepts of Western commercial activity, and particularly on a very, very large scale, the highly risky ventures in the financial services industry that have brought about the most recent economic collapse. There's no sense of proportion. There's no sense of what would have been a good point to stop taking risks or to stop taking profit, or even a sense that those were blessings and not entitlements. Or, furthermore, that such gains could result in happiness instead of being something that pursued you to continue along the same self-destructive path. The Western financial system wouldn't be in the mess that it's in now if people knew when to stop, or knew that what they were doing was making them happy instead of making them greedy. Or, in fact, the sense that what they were doing was, in and of itself, virtuous and a path to a more virtuous existence beyond this one. That scale of value from halal through to jannah represents a completely different self-imagining in the activity of an entrepreneur as what occurs in the West. If this route through your own self-understanding as an entrepreneur means something to you because you're a Muslim or because you live in the Muslim world, then you're beginning to look at some of the key differences between Islam and entrepreneurship as opposed to the Western values and entrepreneurship. I managed to find someone who quite articulately phrased this in English so that I could understand it. And it's pretty simple. I'm not saying anything highly complicated. I'm just saying basically what this nice man has said, that Islam is a complete way of life. It's not just a religion, it's everything. And where the West has made such an effort to separate religion away from other aspects of life, especially commercial ones, it has begun to erode its ability to integrate commercial life with the rest of life. Whereas the Islamic economic system is holistic. It is part of the whole system of life. And it mingles together religious, ideological, social, political, and ethical values in a synchronized way. Again, this is enormously different from the sort of separation of questions of faith from questions of commerce. And it affects the way entrepreneurs act in these different environments. I was encouraged by one of my students to turn to some of the religious tradition to look for the roots of this. And I know that all of you know this hadith. We discussed it this morning. In some ways, it's perhaps the keystone of my entire talk to you today, that the religion itself encourages commercial activity. Whereas in the Christian tradition, there is often a very uncomfortable discouragement of commercial activity. In many aspects of the Islamic traditions, the opposite is true. And this understanding alone might help explain the differences between entrepreneurial activity in the Islamic world and the other parts of the world. There are commentaries upon this hadith that I found in various places, again, always in English. They essentially come down to this point here, that Muhammad himself was an entrepreneur, and most people he knew were entrepreneurs. So having earlier discussed the importance of successful role models in developing entrepreneurial success, what better role model could you possibly have? That's not available to people outside of the Islamic tradition. And because it is available to those within, it makes an enormous difference in the way you understand yourself as an entrepreneur, if you're looking to that enormously resonant pattern of entrepreneurship at the very, very beginning of Islam. Another, I thought, quite beautiful concept that helps to organize everything is this notion that entrepreneurial success should be measured not by monetary metrics, not by the outcome, but by the process. For the most part, in the West, and quite emphatically in the U.S. particularly, success is measured by where you get to, not how you get there. Whereas I'm beginning to realize that in the Islamic world, it's the opposite. You are considered a success for the way you do business, not for